there are many roads in this life, right? There are many paths that you can take, right? Some are on the road to becoming a lawyer. Some are on the road to becoming a doctor. Some are on the road to becoming an engineer. Some are on the road to being addicted to drugs. Some are on the road to being addicted to alcohol, and their life is in turmoil. But there's so many roads out there, right? And this road to freedom, freedom from the corporate body, and freedom from the government tyranny, well, not a lot of people are on that road. Just like you see in this picture here, in this little video, right? It's a long road, but not many people are on it. Not many people are traveling it. The majority of people, the majority of individuals, right? They're like this little sheep here. They just follow along. They just go with the flow. They just do what they're told. They don't stand up. They don't question. They just follow. They're just led, knowing, and learning about human rights and fundamental freedoms, and understanding them, and possessing knowledge. It does nothing for you. It's no good for you. It's like carrying money in your pocket but never spending it. You're just carrying around the knowledge of what's transpiring, but you never do nothing with it. You never take any action on what you know. Well, it's worthless for you. Might as well stop studying. Might as well stop learning, because you're just going to frustrate yourself the more you learn and the more you understand if you never take action. You need to get up, and you need to start running your race. You need to get up, and you need to start putting your knowledge into action and not just sit on it anymore. What you're looking at right here is the Russian Constitution. Yeah, the Russian Constitution. Imagine that. And let's look into Article 17, what it says. In the Russian Federation, recognition and guarantees shall be provided for the rights and freedoms of man and citizen. All right, so the Russian Constitution enumerates it and brings it forth very clearly, right? That there's two different subjects and players in law. That there's a man and there's a citizen. So there's your full legal capacity, meaning the man, and statutory creation, statutory creature. This one being the citizen. And it says that the Russian Federation recognizes and guarantees these rights according to the universally recognized principles and norms of international law. So what's it teaching us? What's it telling us? Russia is saying that when we look into international law, right, we see rights and freedoms that operate for man, and we see rights and freedoms that operate for a citizen or for a statutory creature. So they're clearly enumerating and letting us know that within the international law, there are different subjects and players in operation. There are two different categories of rights and freedoms in operation. There are rights and freedoms for men, human beings, and there are rights and freedoms for citizens. And again, their constitution clearly enumerates and teaches us that these rights and freedoms that they're talking about, right, they didn't take them from the air. They came out of the internationally recognized covenants. They came out of international law. Once Russia signed upon them, they became obligated to those laws, just like America, just like Canada. But when they came to write their constitution, they didn't hide what's going on. They didn't use a Section 7, as we did in the Constitution Act of Canada, to hide the rights and freedoms of men. Article 18 of the Constitution for Russia, the rights and freedoms of man and citizen. There it is again, right? Two distinct players in law. Two different standings in law. One standing in their full legal capacity, and one standing in a limited and abridged capacity. One standing in the natural capacity, and one standing as a statutory creature, created by law, given certain rights and duties. Now watch what it says. The rights and freedoms of man and citizen shall be directly operative. So the rights of a man are directly operative. You're allowed to use them. You're allowed to express them. You're allowed to stand under them. They determine the essence, meaning, and implementation of laws, the activities of the legislative and executive authorities, local self-government. Now watch this. And shall be ensured by the administration of justice. Well, what are they talking about? If you followed my videos and you've learned from me over the past decade, because that's how long I've been harping on this and trying to wake up people. But if you followed me, right, then you know what the administration of justice is. And is that for a citizen? Is that for a statutory creature? Or is that for a man and a woman under their full legal capacity? So even the Russian Constitution, right, knows the rule of law. And even the Russian Constitution brings forth the rule of law and the operation of law, of the administration of justice for the man. And again, the man has rights that are directly operative. The man has rights that they can stand under. Now, of course, I'm not going to sit here and profess and say Russia is doing a great job. No. But what I'm trying to show you in this Constitution of Russia is that they are enumerating and listing and bringing forth the rights and freedoms according to their obligation in international law. Just like Canada and America had to do, right? But they're not hiding what's going on. In Canada, they were deceptive and sneaky by changing words and expression and hiding things to not help make us realize that there were rights of men that operate here in Canada. And some dingbats out there who teach on the internet. And some dingbats out there who go around and say, well, you want to be free, this is the way to be free. They'll teach that, well, the charter is only for the government of Canada. The charter only applies to the government of Canada. And that's what they say. And that's what they teach. That's a straw man argument. It's a lie. It's a deception. You're under deception if you pick that up. And if you take that into your understanding. Or if you teach that, you're deceived, right? What are you saying? You're saying the charter only applies to the government. No, it doesn't. Go to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and read that article of law, right? You're adding a word. You're putting a word there. You're adding the word only to make it only apply to the government. That's not what the charter says. I agree. The charter does apply to the government. The charter applies to the actions of the government. But the charter is also in operation to preserve and allow us to operate our fundamental rights and freedoms, our human rights and freedoms, our natural rights, our rights as men and women. But you see, you fell for it. You fell for it hook, line, and sinker. When they changed words, and they changed definitions of words, when they made up these laws and made up these constitutions, they did it to trick and deceive. And guess what? They tricked and deceived you. That's what they did. That's why here now in 2023, you're sitting back and saying, oh, well, the charter doesn't apply to me. The charter only applies to the government of Canada. Because they deceived you and they tricked you. If you go study, if you go hunt, if you go dig, right, a little bit, you're going to find in the court judgments of Canada what that charter really represents and what that charter really means. And if you dig a little deeper, right, you're going to find that Article 7, that subject, that player, everyone, that only refers to a man and woman, that only refers to a human being. Well then, if it only refers to a man or a woman, right, what's it trying to say? It's trying to say that in that article of law is where our fundamental rights and freedoms exist. It's where our natural rights have been preserved. Now, it doesn't bring forth all our natural rights. No, even the courts have said it. Natural law and the rights of a man, they develop and they are an ever-growing force in the land. So when you point to Article 7, it doesn't include all of our rights. But that's why there's Article 26 in the Constitution, to back up Article 7 for the human being. But Article 7 strictly operates for a man. For a man. But yet you're going out there on the internet and teaching people who are following you and telling them that the charter has no application for them. It's a deception, and you need to stop. All right, so let's look into Canada and into the laws that are in operation in Canada and into the operations of law that are going on. And I'm going to look to the Quebec Civil Code. But as we get into this and look at what's transpiring and see the same thing that's transpiring in Russia is transpiring here in Canada, I'm using the Quebec Civil Code because it shows us very clearly. It expresses it very clearly. But this is going on all across our country and all across America. These are the same operations of law and the UK that are being used against us. Now the Quebec Civil Code, Article 1, it says every human being. Oh, a human being, it's just the color of man. Oh, a human being is a monster. It's not a monster. When it says human being, see monster, right? And then it says a human being what? That's been deformed. A human being that's what? That's, excuse me, but in those times, it means a retarded person. It means a person who doesn't look like a regular natural person. Someone who was born without an arm. Someone who was born with a decrepit face. That's what it's trying to say. They used to call those people that look like that a monster. It's a good thing our society developed that we don't call people like that anymore a monster. But when you send me a link on the YouTube and you say, look what it says, human being, see monster, and then it says monster, and then it says a human being who resembles. Doesn't say he's a human being. He says it resembles, but with a deformity. But anyways, every human being possesses juridical personality and has full enjoyment of civil rights. Every human being possesses a legal person. Every human being can act as a statutory creature. Are you seeing that? There's a distinction, right? There's a human being, there's a man. And that man can operate as a statutory creature. That man can operate as that citizen. They're not one and the same, right? You possess it. You're not it. You possess a car, right? Are you your car? You possess a computer, right? Are you your computer? No, but you can use your computer and you can use your car. And that's what the law is trying to say here. And can someone force you to use your car? No. Well, then they can't force you to use your juridical personality. They can't force you to operate as a statutory creature. And the Civil Code of Quebec brings it very clearly, brings it forth very clearly. A person. Now notice the subject, right? Doesn't say a human being, right? It says a person may only renounce the exercise of his civil rights. Okay, well, what do they mean? Where do you get civil rights from? Do you get civil rights from foundational law? Do you get civil rights from natural law? Or do you get civil rights from the legislator? Do you get civil rights from statutory powers? Well, you get civil rights from statutory powers, right? And those civil rights and those statutory powers operate on what? On statutory creatures, right? On that juridical personality. And that's that person in law. Person. And here, when they're talking about renouncing the exercise of the civil rights, of course they're going to bring the person, because it's the person who has the obligation, not the human being. They can't force you into recognition. They can't force you to take up these rights. A person may only renounce the exercise of his civil rights to the extent that is consistent with public order. Whoa! So there's an operation of law. There's a way to what? To renounce the exercise of your civil rights. And guess what? It's not against public order. It's contained within public order. Within. So those who say that, oh, when you do these things and when you seek to exercise your right, you're going against the public and it's not so good. No. No, these operations of law exist and are there within public order. Now the rest of that says Quebec Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms. So this is the Quebec Charter. Whereas every human being possesses intrinsic rights and freedoms designed to ensure his protection and development. Well, what did the law just say? What did the law just articulate? Is that a civil right? Is that a statutory right because it's coming from the Quebec Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms? Or is that a natural law? Is that a fundamental right and freedom? It says every human being possesses intrinsic rights and freedoms. And intrinsic says belonging naturally. Belonging naturally. Essential to the character of what's being spoken about. Right? So the human being, right? The human being possesses intrinsic rights. What's it saying? It's stating the rule of law before your very eyes. It's showing you the rule of law. I talk about it a lot, right? Well, here you're seeing it expressed. Here's the rule of law. What? Every man has natural rights. Here's the rule of law. Every human being possesses intrinsic rights. So what are we seeing in law? What is law teaching us? Fundamentally, in the beginning of this now, in the commencements of this, in the start of our race, right? Remember in the video in the beginning here, I said part one, the start, right? So what is law trying to say to us? Law is teaching us that a human being possesses two things. Or a man and a woman has the capacity for two things within law. What's that? Intrinsic rights, natural rights, the rights of man, right? Or civil rights, statutory rights. Can be a statutory person or a juridical personality. So from the very onset, from the very start, right? When you look at yourself, when you go to the mirror and go to the washroom and look in the mirror, understand that attached to you are two different sets of rights. I'm going to use this in a biblical reference. When you say, oh, you have the angel on one shoulder and the devil on your other shoulder, and the devil's tempting you to do evil, and the angel's there to encourage you. Well, that's exactly what you can look at it in your fundamental human rights and freedoms. You as a man or woman, you as a human being, you possess natural rights, intrinsic rights that belong to you because of who you are. And they're with you. And you can never sell them. And you can never give them away. But on the other hand, right, you have the capacity to operate as a statutory creature. You have the capacity to take on civil rights and be ruled and restricted by civil rights. We're going to look at one more. It's back into the Quebec Charter of Human Rights. Article 1. It says every human being has the right to life and to personal security, inviolability, and freedom. Okay, well, what rights are they talking about? Are they talking about civil rights? Are they talking about statutory rights? What is this, the right to life? Is that a statutory right or is that a natural right? What is personal security? Is that a statutory right or is that a natural right? What about freedom? Is that a statutory right or a natural right? And then it goes on to say, he also possesses juridical personality. Oh, so there again we see the rule of law, right, in operation. Every human being, what? Has natural rights. Every man or woman, what? Has natural rights, fundamental human rights and freedoms. But they also possess the ability to operate as a statutory creature, as a juridical personality. So every human being, every man or woman, has the right to personal security, right? That's what it says. That's a natural right. That's what they're claiming. It's the rule of law. And you look into Thomson Newspaper Limited versus Canada, right? It says, while the individuals as a rule of law have full legal capacity by operation of law alone, artificial creatures are creatures of the state and enjoy civil rights, not natural rights, not fundamental rights, but civil rights and powers only upon the approval of statutory authorities. Now watch. The individual may stand upon his constitutional rights. He owes no duty to the state, since he receives nothing therefrom beyond the protection of his life and property. Whoa. So an individual standing under their full legal capacity, standing under his constitutional rights, what is he entitled to? Well, he's entitled to protection of his life and property. He's entitled to that protection under natural law, as a natural right. And we see that express itself, right, in the Quebec Civil Code. In the Charter of Rights and Freedoms of Quebec, Article 1, where it says that every human being, the man or the woman, has the right to personal security. Well, it's a natural right. You're standing in your full legal capacity, and you have that right. And then we see that the courts have already agreed. Yep, absolutely. If you stand under your full legal capacity, then the state, Canada, that corporate body, it owes you that obligation under common law. It owes you that obligation under natural law. So you look down there in Article 3, right? It says every person is the possessor of fundamental freedoms, including freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, freedom of opinion, freedom of expression, freedom of peaceful assembly, and freedom of association. All right, who's the subject and player here? Is it a human being? Is it a man or a woman? No, right? It says every person. That's the statutory creature, right? That's the artificial person. And that statutory creature, right, is a possessor of fundamental freedoms. Isn't that funny? The human being possesses a juridical personality, and then the juridical personality, the person, possesses fundamental freedoms. So those freedoms of conscience, freedoms of religion, freedoms of opinion, freedom of expression, and the like, right? They're all attached to the legal person. They're all attached to a statutory creature. And that's why they can be limited and abridged. When you look at the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, right, in Article 2, we find the same expressions: freedom of conscience and religion, freedom of thought, belief, freedom of peaceful assembly, freedom of association. So we find the same freedoms listed in the Constitution. But the subject there is everyone. And if you're not careful, and if you read that, right, you could apply that to meaning every human being, every man or woman, because of what we find in Article 7. But that's not what the courts have said. The everyone here, right, is everyone part of that democratic society. The everyone here is everyone who operates within that democratic society. everyone who's a statutory creature. Whether you're a doctor, a lawyer, police officer, a judge, a cook, taxi driver, Uber driver. That's the everyone that they're talking about here. And notice it's fundamental freedoms again, right? Not fundamental rights, as we learned last time. And these freedoms, right, they're subject to limitation. When we jump into the international covenants, and I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to jump you into the international covenants because you should know that. You should know this by now, right? After all these years, when we look into the international covenants and we look for the subsequent right, the corresponding right in the covenant, well, we're going to see that when these rights are listed and brought forth, after they're mentioned, then they state that the state party can put a limiting factor upon it. That these rights can be limited and bridged only in certain situations, but nevertheless they can be. They can be. All right, so I'm going to stir this up a little bit here. And I know there's going to be some people that are in the corporation Canada that are not going to like what I'm about to say, but nevertheless, I'm still going to say it. Because guess what? It's my right. And that's a pun on what I'm about to say to you guys. Because if the wrong people get a hold of this knowledge, up till now it's been okay what I'm teaching. They know it's there, you know. But this level that I'm about to say, and what I'm about to reveal here, they don't like this. Because if the wrong people get a hold of this, it can make big trouble for public order. Big trouble. But that's okay. I'm entitled to say it, right? I'm entitled to defend human rights and fundamental freedoms. No matter how deep I want to take it. No matter where I want to go with it. So as a man or a woman, right? Do you not possess the freedom of conscience? Do you not possess the freedom of opinion? Do you not possess the freedom of peaceful assembly? Yes or no? Yes or no? No, you don't, right? You don't. Because it's on the person. It's on the statutory creature. Well then, as a man or woman, what do you have? What do you possess? Well, change that word. One little word of their magic games. And no longer title it or designate it a freedom. But call it a right. A right of conscience. A right of opinion. A right of expression. A right of association. And what does it become now? And what is that now? Now that's natural rights. Now that's fundamental rights. Not a civil freedom that's been granted to you, but a fundamental right that you're exercising. And where could you protect that? And where could you find protection for those rights? In Article 1 up there, right, it's teaching us, and the rule of law is teaching us that man, human being, has a right to freedom. It's a right. And the right is called freedom. It's not saying that we have freedom of. Freedom of. Freedom of. We have the right to freedom. And therein lies a big difference. A very big difference. That's why every time you look into law, right, when they talk about these fundamental freedoms, they're always attaching it to the statutory creature. They're always attaching it to the juridical personality. Oh, the citizen has this freedom, and the driver has that freedom, and the resident has this freedom. It's always attached to that juridical personality, to that statutory creature. Because it's a civil freedom. And it can be regulated and controlled. But when you stand under your right to freedom, there's a difference. The only thing that controls that is common law or criminal law, criminal code. If you do wrong, you harm, steal, bear false witness. All those common law codes are within the criminal code of Canada. And you do that, then you lose your right to freedom. You lose your right to freedom. Not under the will of statutory power, but under the law of man. But apart from that, you have a natural right to freedom. And what's in the right to freedom? That's what I'm going to ask you. So when you say, I have the right to freedom, what does that mean? Are you just stating a word, freedom? I have the right to freedom, and that's what it means, just freedom. Okay, what does the context of that word freedom mean? What makes up that word freedom in law when you say it as a man or woman? What makes it up? Do the same attributes. Do the same attributes that you find here in Article 3 and in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Could those same attributes make up that word for you, freedom? And if they could, right, then you're exercising a right. You're no longer exercising a freedom of, but you're exercising a right to. And if you're exercising a right to, then they can no longer put a limitation or abridgment upon it. When we look to the Quebec Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms, the Canadian Charter, United States Constitution, and the Russian Constitution, they all say the same thing. All of them. Why? Well, because the rule of law forces them to. The rule of law controls them, and they must. Was it a coincidence? Was it just fun? Was it just circumstance? Was it just happenstance that this is all in the charters? That it's all the same operations of law going on? No, it's not. And I profess to you, and I say to you, that which you are learning here, that's the same thing that's going on in all of our countries. It's nothing new under the sun. These operations of law they use are exactly the same, one to another country, just expressed in different ways. And here, the Quebec Charter of Human Rights, the Charter shall not be so interpreted as to suppress or limit the enjoyment or exercise of any human right or freedom not enumerated herein. The next one, the guarantee in this charter of certain rights and freedoms shall not be construed as denying the existence of any other rights or freedoms that exist in Canada. United States Constitution, 9th Amendment. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage other rights retained by the people. Well, what rights do people retain? What rights do people retain? Well, natural rights, right? People, when you talk about people, you're talking about them exterior to the corporate body, exterior to the state party, not interior to it. The Russian Constitution, the listing in the Constitution of the Russian Federation of the fundamental rights and freedoms shall not be interpreted as a rejection or derogation of other universally recognized human rights and freedoms. So all the same operations of law. Well, we're saying that there's certain rights and freedoms expressed in this charter, and there are others, and we're not going to deny you that there are others. Well, what rights and freedoms are they talking about? Are they talking about civil rights and freedoms? No, they're not. They're talking about your natural rights. They're talking about absolute rights. They're talking about inalienable rights. That's what they're talking about. And when they say that there's certain of these listed in the charter, yes, there are. We can go and find them. We can go and find them directly expressed. But those that are not directly expressed, right, we can still exercise. We can still exercise. And notice the Quebec Charter. Listen to the way it's written out. Listen to the way it's written out. And this is what the other three are saying also, but not so directly. It's the other three are saying the same operation of law, but not so directly. The charter shall not be so interpreted as to suppress or limit the enjoyment or exercise of any human right or freedom not enumerated therein. So what are they saying? They are not allowed to suppress or to limit the exercise of your right, your human right, and your human freedom that's not listed herein, or that is listed therein. So the obligation that they're saying is we're not to suppress or limit. We're not to stop you from exercising your right. We're not allowed to. Why? Because the rule of law says you can't. You can't. You can only use deception on me. You can only trick me. And you know what that is? People are upset, right? People who are waking up. But you know what that is? That's interference on what? That's interference on your conscience. It's interference on your mind. That's what it's doing. It's a bondage on your mind through things that have been implanted there, through the society. So let me ask you, how does this state party, how does this corporate body, how does it see you? How does it interact with you? Are you a driver before them? Are you a worker before them? Do they know you as a taxpayer? Do you fill out your taxes every year? Do they know you as a homeowner? with a qualified title. You have a title registry. In all capacities, they're operating with you, right? They know you as that statutory creature. They know you as that statutory creature. Have you ever said anything to them? Have you ever sent a claim to them? To say, hey, listen, I realize that I have a whole set of rights, natural rights, fundamental rights, human rights, common law rights, whatever you, well, I shouldn't say whatever you want to title them. You should call them what they are, according to the law, according to what they recognize. Because all one and the same. But it seems like they only speak one language, their language. And many people have tried to speak it out and to show them in not their language, but another language, and they don't see it, and they won't hear it. They'll only hear it in their language. You have natural rights, fundamental rights, human rights. And if you don't say anything, and if you don't tell them who you are, then who you are to them is what you profess, which is I'm a driver, I'm a homeowner, I'm a resident. So before you do anything, before you interact with them and try and exercise a right, many I read the comments. Many people are saying they're going to do this, I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do this. Well, good luck to you. And I don't mean to be rough here, but if you don't start your race at the starting line and you try and jump ahead, you're not going to succeed. You're going to be disqualified, right? How many people are trying to run this race? How many different groups are out there? How many people are teaching different things out there? It's up to you who you want to follow. I don't force you to come and listen to me. I don't force you to listen to what I'm teaching here and what I'm sharing about our fundamental rights and freedoms. But there's many people out there that are teaching, right? Everyone's trying to run the race. And some are coming up to the starting line and they're coming with the wrong equipment. And they're coming with the wrong equipment. And the judges there and the referees and the officials are saying, well, no, sorry, you can't run this race. Well, why not? I want to run the race. Well, because you're not wearing the right equipment. You're not wearing the right equipment. And that's an analogy, right, of what's going on. Because many people are coming to the state party. I'll give you a few examples. We just need to read the OPCA judgment that's out there. And we see, right, blooding their fingers and putting thumbprints on documents. Creating trusts. Calling these things that they create trusts. And say the government's now under obligation to it. Claiming that there's foreign judgments that are being placed against the government. All these crazy stuff that's being said is being done. All these crazy waves lining up to the starting line. And the officials standing there. Who's that? Well, that's the executive powers of Canada, right? That's the ones who you're trying to contact. That's the ones who you're trying to get to not exercise, but acknowledge your rights and freedoms, to acknowledge what you're trying to do. And you're lining up to that starting line and they're picking you off one by nope. Well, why? Why can they do that? Well, because you're coming to the race with the wrong equipment. They do recognize fundamental rights and freedoms. They do recognize the rule of law, right? We see it. They do. And you have to come to that starting line with that equipment. That's why I say, and I bring forth that you need to claim your recognition before them. In Article 35 of the Criminal Code, right, it talks about a claim of right. And it says, holding your possessions under a claim of right, you're afforded such freedoms, you're afforded such protection from the law. Well, that's the operation of that claim of right, claim of recognition. You're telling them, look, until now you haven't recognized me in my full legal capacity. You've only treated me like a statutory creature. All the interactions you're doing with me, even when I'm at home, I'm a resident. If you understood what I meant when I said that, you'd be upset. Because they don't let your conscience go no matter where you are in their society. The only way to get freedom of conscience is to step out of that garbage. To step out of those obligations that they're placing upon you. And their position is, well, you signed yourself up for them. You entered into that role of the statutory creature when you made the application. And you signed upon that application and presented it to us. You said you'd live like this. You said you'd be ruled by this law. It's not my fault. It's your fault. Okay, well then say something. And say something in their language. And come to the starting line with the right equipment. And once you start your race, okay, then great. Now they know who you are. Now what is it that you're upset about? And what is it that you want to seek to exercise? And let me ring it in your head. And let me say it again in case you haven't understood the concept of this video. Claim of rights. Claim of right. Claim your rights before them. And the only way you can claim your rights is if you can express your rights. If you can't express your rights, then you can't claim your rights. And if you can't claim your rights, you can't go and exercise them. And you can't go and defend them. Because within the context, the way they set it up, right, it's our responsibility. It's our responsibility that if they're removing our fundamental right, we have a right not to be deprived. And what's that right not to be deprived? Well, I got to go and defend it now. I got to go and fight for it now. But how can I fight for it if I don't understand it? And how can I fight for it if I don't even know how to exercise it? And how can I fight for it if I've never even claimed it? I'm not laying claim to it. Run the race properly.